All right, hello everyone. Eric Marks, findingmiddleearth.com, and today I'm going to do a video talking about how I tweak my settings in AFC mode on my Fujifilm X-T2. So the very last video that I made, I released, I think it was late last night, I was talking about how I was wrong when I previously talked about the X-T2 autofocus tracking capability. Right when this camera first came out, I made a video about 8 months ago, and I just gave people kind of my first impressions on what I thought the AFC mode was going to be like. And so I was making that video, kind of an update video last night, now that I own the camera, and I was saying how wrong I was to assume that it was just going to be kind of mediocre, because it's actually really good. But it's only really good once you tweak the settings, okay? You have to tweak some stuff on the back end. Now, today is March 29th, okay? So there's a few days left for the new Fujifilm firmware, the firmware updates to come out, okay? Because Fuji said it was going to be released in late March. So when that comes out, apparently the AFC mode is getting another little lift in performance. So I'll do some testing on that out in the field when that happens, and there might even be another, noticeable performance difference, which would be really nice. Because my biggest complaint about this was that the AFC mode, just in standard default mode, can sometimes render some pretty inconsistent results. But if you go into the AFC Custom Settings and you tweak the settings to the situation that you're shooting, you'll get a lot higher keeper rate, and you'll notice that the autofocus just completely changes its reaction to your subjects. So before we actually get into the camera and I tell you how I tweak the settings, I want you to keep a couple things in mind. Number one, every situation and scenario is going to be different. It's going to be based on, are you shooting a dark subject with a very bright, backlit background? Are you shooting a very dark subject with a very bright foreground? Are you trying to shoot a subject with a lot of obstacles in between you and the subject, like walls and other people? I don't know if you're shooting cars or horses. So anyway, there's a lot of different situations, so keep that in mind. I can't just show you the perfect formula for every single scenario, but I can kind of steer you in the right direction and show you how I use it. Because I normally use, whenever I use tracking, I normally use it for wildlife, very little bits of aviation photography, and then my 1-year-old daughter crawling all over the house. So I'm not shooting like professional sports or anything. I haven't even brought this to like a professional sports, game or anything. So if there are sports photographers that watch me that shoot Fuji cameras, feel free to leave your input down in the comments for my viewers, so that they know maybe the settings that you use in your Fuji camera. If you're using it for like football or soccer or basketball or something like that, I'd be really intrigued to learn from you if you guys shoot Fuji with sports. So let's go ahead and get into the camera, and I'll show you how I tweak the camera settings for the situations that I shoot in. Alright, so now that we have the Fujifilm X-T2 in front of us, let's go ahead and look at some of the settings you're going to change before we actually get into the tweaking. So right now you can see that my focus mode is set to AFC. Yours might be in AFS if that's what you normally shoot in. So all you have to do to switch that to continuous mode is to just reach around to the front of your camera and flick the little lever from S to C, and you'll see it changes right there to AFC. And if you have the battery grip for your X-T2, you'll want to go ahead and turn the boost mode lever from normal to boost, and you'll see right here it says performance boost mode. And the boost mode basically just allows you the ability to shoot with 11 frames per second versus 8 frames per second. And then it also boosts the AF tracking just a little bit. There's no like specific scientific algorithm that Fuji lays out on a piece of paper that tells you how much the boost mode helps with the AF performance, but it does help with the performance if you turn it into boost mode. Okay, so before we actually get into tweaking, you might want to consider setting up your camera for quick access to these tweaking modes, because they're in the menu. If you want to actually access them in the menu, you have to go to the menu and then over to the AF MF area, and then right down here to AFC Custom Settings. Now with me, I have if you hold your display back button for a few seconds, you'll see this little menu come up right here. And this is where you can assign your custom function buttons to what you want them to be. So as you can see, I have my custom function button, which one is it? I think it's number 5, yeah. So my custom function button number 5 is set to AFC Custom Settings. So what that means is whenever I click this little right selector here, it opens up the AFC settings for me, okay? So let's use that here in practice. So I'll just click that and it goes right to the settings, Okay, so you might want to do that, you might not, it's up to you. You can assign it to any function button you want. There's quite a few of them on the camera. That is completely up to you. I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that you can do that if you hold the back and display button for a few seconds. You have the option to change the function buttons around to suit your style of shooting. Okay, so now that we're into the custom function buttons, before we actually get into this, there are a few things that you'll want to set up in the menu. So the first thing you're going to want to look at is AF mode, okay? So yours might be on single point or wide tracking, but the best one for autofocus tracking is going to be zone. And that's because you can actually pick a specific portion of the AF sensor to track instead of using wide tracking, which would be all of the AF points or the whole sensor. And then the single point is just going to be one single autofocus point. So this zone will allow you to kind of swap around zones. And here's what I mean by that. If we go into focus area, you'll see that we have 3 options of size for our zone. We have this larger one, the middle, and the smallest zone. And each of them are going to be used for different things. So for example, I had someone email me recently asking about aviation photography, and I had someone asking about like shooting wildlife, you know, that's moving. And so for aviation photography or some kind of larger subject like that, like NASCAR, you'd probably want a wider tracking zone because you're not wanting to focus on a specific portion, you know, of the subject, right? As long as the plane is in focus, or as long as the car is in focus, you're fine. So you want to give yourself a wider zone to track. But typically with wildlife, you want their face and their eyes and their nose in focus, correct? So you'd want to go down to probably a middle or the smaller zone so you can kind of pinpoint your tracking a little better. So you have these 3 options to use for whatever situation you want to use them in. So just keep that in mind. Wider tracking is probably for larger subjects where you don't really have to pinpoint the focus and the sharpness. And then the middle, and of course the small s, is for more of a fine-tuned pinpoint focus. So now that we have that set up, okay, in the area mode I explained, now that we have zone chosen here in the AF mode, now we can get into the AFC Custom Settings. And again, you can get into it by just clicking in the menu, or with me, I can just click this little selector button and it'll take me right into it there. Okay, so there's 5 preset, okay, custom settings here, which are basically presets from Fuji that they throw into the menu system for you, and it gives you a little brief description on what each one is used for. Now, these are not gimmicks, okay? There's a lot of other cameras. I know there's some Sony cameras that have this kind of stuff built in, and those can be kind of gimmicky. They're just kind of for marketing, and they don't work that well. The Fuji X-T2 tracking settings here, the AFC settings, they work really well. There's a few that work better than others, so let me get into that. So the first one here, this little multi-purpose set 1, that's kind of your default tracking mode. You probably don't want to use that most of the time because it's probably the most inconsistent one. It's not that it's bad, it's just inconsistent. So you can see number 2 is where we start getting fine-tuned subjects here. So it says ignore obstacles and continue to track subject. So for wildlife, this is probably a really good place to be, okay? And I've used this preset for wildlife and I've been happy. If you go to number 3, this one says for accelerating and decelerating subjects. Then if you go to number 4, this is suddenly appearing subject. So they have a picture of a skier because, you know, a lot of times you're waiting for a skier to come over a hill or come over a ramp and jump through the air. And so that's just for suddenly appearing subjects like that. Or maybe even, you know, something that you're like a squirrel or something. If you're just waiting for an animal or some kind of, you know, squirrel or a bird to kind of fly through your camera, this one would probably be a good setup for that. And then number 5 is erratically moving and accelerating, decelerating subjects. So now let me give you my take on each one of these, okay? So number 2 is my favorite one to use for pretty much almost every moving subject. It seems to be the most consistent. Now, if you're shooting sports, I'll get to that in a minute, but this one here seems to be pretty inconsistent. It says this one's for accelerating and decelerating subjects. So if I have an accelerating and decelerating subject, I'll typically just use 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are really good. 3 is the one that I haven't, you know, quite gotten used to yet. And again, it could be me, it could be user error, but I just haven't had a good experience with 3 for this kind of photography. I normally either stick with 2 or 4 are my most used presets here. And then there's, of course, other situations you could find yourself in, like if you have a tough lighting situation. So let's say that you're shooting wildlife, and sometimes, of course, we know that wildlife likes to lounge out under trees and in the shade, and then there'll be maybe a harsh sun backlit scene behind them. That can be kind of tough to track, right? If they're kind of walking in the shade, but there's a really bright backlit sun behind them, because the autofocus sensors are probably going to want to lean towards focusing on something that's brighter than the subject. So if you have a brighter subject in the foreground, a darker subject in the foreground with a really harsh backlit background, I have actually kind of created a little formula here that I use in the custom setting. So this is kind of where you get to create your own formula, okay, out of all these options. So here's what I do if I have a shadow foreground and a harsh background for as far as the lighting goes. You can set three custom functions here. You can set up the tracking sensitivity, the speed tracking sensitivity, and the zone area switching. So let's say that I'm tracking an animal in the shade with a harsh backlit sun behind me, okay? So what I'm gonna do here is I would actually put this on number 3. Now you can see these little animations that it gives you here. You can see that it shows, you know, just basically this little animated dot going back and forth. It's not very specific, but at least it gives you kind of an idea of what it's gonna do. Basically, this is just how sensitive the points are gonna be to tracking. So I like to use number 3 in this situation, okay? The next is speed tracking sensitivity. This one is a little better of an animation. It kind of shows a slow moving dot going through your scene. And then this one is kind of a slow moving dot, and then all of a sudden it kind of shoots off into the corner, which, as you can see, it says accel and decel. So that's kind of erratic moving. So I've found that 1 is probably your best bet there. That's kind of the perfect compromise between 0 and 2, because 2 I have used, and my gosh, with 2, there could be a butterfly or something, or a leaf falling from a tree that'll get in between you and your subject, and it'll like lock on immediately. So 2 can get a little distracted sometimes with obstacles. So I would shoot at 1. And then again, if we're in this scene where we have shadow foreground, harsh backlit background, I like to use the front section here of the zone. Now there's auto and there's center. Most of the time I use auto if I'm gonna be in this custom mode, but for this kind of situation, I would use front. So basically the tracking sensitivity is gonna be on 3, the speed tracking sensitivity on 1, and then our zone tracking on front, okay? And again, this isn't like, I haven't done, you know, a year of testing in every single situation to where this is like a for sure thing. This is just what works really well for me. And again, I've received a lot of requests on my last couple of videos on making a video like this. So I want to stress the fact that this is just what I've found to work really good for me and the situations that I've found myself shooting in. But there are a lot more situations that I'm going to be putting myself in the future that I haven't come across yet. So I'm sure I'll do some update videos in the future when I, you know, figure out how these custom settings are going to help me attack those kind of situations. So yeah, I hope this helped give you an idea of how I tweak mine. And if you guys have any questions at all, you can leave them in the comments. But just to kind of do a quick recap, you can hold the display back button very quickly here, just for a couple seconds. You can assign the custom settings to any one of these function buttons. Well, maybe not any one of them. I have mine set. There's a few of them that I think have some restrictions on which ones you can set. I could be wrong. I don't know for sure. You'll have to look that up. I think you can assign it to any of them you want. But again, I have mine assigned to function 5, which is this little right selector here. So if you do that, you can get, you know, quick access. And then of course, we'll want to go into the focus, the AF mode, and choose zone. And then focus area is going to be, you know, allowing you to choose what area of the zone you want the active focus points to track inside of. And that's going to be based on the situation that you're in. And then of course, the actual custom settings themselves. My most used are 2 and 4, all right? And then of course 6 if there's some harsh lighting. But you can just play around. The great thing about having this custom number 6 is that you can just play around with it. You know, you can really dig in there and play around with your own settings. So that's the nice thing about that, is you can tweak it the way you want until you get a really good keeper rate, and then you know for the future. So it might take, you know, one photo shoot, you know, kind of a test photo shoot of some bad blurry photos to get to know how this works. But then for the future, you know, right? You can save a custom setting formula in your head that you know you want to set here, and then you'll be set. So yeah, I hope this helped you guys. I hope this was informative enough to where at least it gets you guys on the right path to getting the most out of your AFC settings for the X-T2. And again, if you have any questions at all, please leave them in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you would like to stay up to date on all of my latest photography videos and adventures, click the big subscribe button below. And if you would like to find out more about me and how to become a great photographer, visit my website at findingmiddleearth.com.